Hello, good morning, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to our new first session of the MOVE seminars focused on the Caribbean of the 2021. Happy New Year to everyone. We will start this year talking with our colleague in the main office from UNEP in Nairobi, talking about what is going on in electrification in Africa. You are all very welcome. Thank you for being there and staying tuned to Mobile Latam. We will have with us today David Rubia. So David Rubia is a program officer within the Air Quality and Mobility Unit of the Economy Division, working on a global program that is supporting the transition from internal combustion engine to electric mobility. David's background focuses on advanced drinking water and wastewater treatment with over 10 years of practical experience ranging from project management, technical design to piloting and on fuel scale performance evaluation of treatment systems. Further, David has 6 years of hands-on project management experience in the sustainable development arena, focused on climate change mitigation and air quality improvement in the transport sector. David has a master's degree in international engineer and a bachelor's degree on environment and resource economics, both from University of New Hampshire in the USA. So thank you so much, David, for being here today with us. We are really interested in the projects that you are managing in the region. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Yone. Is my mic active? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Fantastic. Okay, so I'm very happy to join you guys today to share on the work that we're doing on electric mobility in Africa. What I want to do today is just sort of go over some of the lessons I think we've learned implementing electric 2- and 3-wheeler demonstration projects in East Africa, or trying to implement, I should say. So I think the first thing I like to point out is that the strategic cross-cutting nature of electric mobility, when you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, it's very important because it cuts across very many different SDGs. When you transition to electric mobility, you will improve air quality. You're obviously going to reduce climate emissions. There's a huge complementarity with renewable energy and push for renewable energy, so that helps, pushes that, and so that's good. The thing that really excites me about, especially looking at sub-Saharan Africa, is the economic potential for electric mobility. There's a huge potential for improving the balance of trade, so reducing the imports of fuels and looking at domestic power. There's also the import of vehicles, used vehicles. So you can look at trying, especially for 2- and 3-wheelers, looking at domestic manufacturing for those, because the use cases are usually very localized. And so you don't really have something that you can import that addresses the local context. And so there is an incentive to design and manufacture or assemble locally. So you have a lot of assembly jobs. You also have an opportunity for creating a lot of value chain addition to this manufacturing. As I mentioned before, there's obviously the renewable energy synergies, and that's also economic potential. There's obviously a big link to ICT. It's smart mobility. There's a lot of link to tech, so that's a huge potential. And there's obviously the link, because when you look at 2- and 3-wheelers, at least for sub-Saharan Africa, it's largely employs, or it's a big part of the informal sector. So if you improve that aspect and reduce poverty in the informal sector, that's another huge SDG that you're going to address. Again, I think that what we've seen is that motorcycles are an ideal stepping stone for electric mobility. I'll talk about more reasons about that later. So in terms of an overview of the projects that we have, we currently have 8 projects spread across Southeast Asia and Africa. I have colleagues, my colleague Bart Fabian in the Bangkok office is helping implement the Southeast Asia projects. We have projects obviously in Vietnam, Philippines, Thailand, Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia. We've had projects in Rwanda and Morocco, although those did not have resources for piloting. The project largely has three components. There's the information gathering, what I call the planning and project baseline setting. So that's where you look at all the data, you try to quantify business as usual, you look at local manufacturing potential, you model electric demand, you look at financing gaps and all those good things. So that's the real data push to try and set the context. Then it's very important to have demonstration studies, demonstration pilots. What I think is for two big reasons. One is to further raise awareness. When people interact with electric two and three wheelers, they get to learn more about them. And then the other thing is to collect data, because ultimately we want to result in policy change. And so we do want to collect good use, in on-ground data that we can be able to translate to policymakers to make the right, to set the right signals in terms of policy for their context. The last components of these projects is the knowledge management. So creating of case studies, creating of tools, managing websites, communications, and seeing to replication of the successes in these countries. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for our donors, and so we've had funding from the German Ministry of Environment, the Swedish International Development Agency, the Hewlett Foundation. There's the Mohammed VI Foundation in Morocco, Mohammed VI Foundation for the Protection of Environment, that is, and of course the FIA Foundation. So in terms of, I'll just jump into lessons learned. I think the first thing, and I've talked about this, is just data, the importance of data, the importance of going out there and assessing your fleets. One of the things that we realized, this is this context in Kenya here, by going in and collecting data, we realized, and we didn't appreciate this, that in Kenya, as of early as of 2009, I think, or 2010, there were more imports of two and three wheelers than cars. And that was something that was just missed, on a yearly basis. And if you look at actually their uses and everything, you'll see that later in another slide. For new imports, we're actually seeing most of the emissions coming from two and three wheelers, and that just blew our minds away, because we're like, there's no way motorcycles can be emitting more than cars. But when you're looking at almost twice the imports of motorcycles and cars, and you look at the the consumption of fuel by these things, you start realizing there's a huge potential for emissions reductions there. So collect lots of data and let it guide you. Something else that we've been struggling with or grappling with when we're talking about trying to get demonstration projects on going is the importance of what we call fit for purpose. When you're looking at what you have for internal combustion engine motorcycles, it's very important to try and come up with a product that is fit for that use case, and not like in this picture here where you see a very futuristic motorcycle that cannot carry so many passengers. Now, a little caveat to that. The picture on the left is obviously breaking laws, is overloading and overspeeding. So you don't want necessarily to replicate that. There's an opportunity when you're looking at this transition to come in with better safety laws and better enforcement of the traffic code. But definitely when you have paratransit motorcycles, you do want the motorcycle that you're trying to demonstrate to have the same use case as what you're replacing. Otherwise, you're not you're not going to be effective. You want to try and understand the power curves, the torques, and all these things, so that you can be able to come up with a product that at least tries to match that. Now, one of the things we do say is that you don't want to match everything, because a lot of the operation envelope for existing internal combustion engine is outside of maybe even laws. Like I said, there's overloading, overspeeding. So if motorcycles are going at 120, 130 kilometers an hour, you don't want to match that, because that might be illegal in your context. So you want to make sure that you also remember it's an opportunity to rein in on safety and law enforcement. I've talked about economic potential. This is a slide that I like to show. This is in Uganda. The boda, which is the motorcycle taxi industry, it's called the boda because they used to travel from the border of Kenya to the border of Uganda, and so they were called boda, and then the name was corrupted down to boda. They're the second largest employer in the country after agriculture. Agriculture is the biggest employer. So that's a huge statistic right there. It's obviously the largest employer of youth. And today when we're looking about sustainable development, when we're sensitive to how the development is affecting youth and gender, that's a very key. So you're looking at a demographic that has created a lot of employment for previously unemployed demographic. Then we're talking about the value of the industry. I think in 2013, Uganda imported about $31 million worth of motorcycles. I think that at the time it was, I think, about 5 or 10%, 5%, I think is the statistic here. I forgot to write it here, of what the Ministry of Transport budget was, something like that, if I'm not mistaken. It could be, my math is, yeah, about 5%. So you can start to see how it's a significant player when you compare to the economy. So you need to explore. You look at the fuel they're consuming, and you see how inefficient internal combustion engine is, and you say, we can be able to cut back on the cost of transport if we were to transition to a lower cost energy for propulsion. So this is very important to understand the economic context. Now, something that's very near and dear to me is looking at unique opportunities to support the uptake, to support this transition to electric mobility. Many of you might be familiar with mobile money transfers, which, have had a huge uptake in sub-Saharan Africa. Particularly in Kenya, there's the famous M-Pesa, which means mobile money. Pesa is money. So this M-Pesa is money in Swahili, sorry, is a peer-to-peer. You could be able to send people money, and it had a huge growth uptake. Now, looking at how it was able to grow, obviously the first thing you would assume is because of the technology, the tech. And actually the tech was very simple. Turns out what really helped the technology or the product grow was the agent network. The agents, as you see the picture down here, is where you would go if person A sent person B money onto their phone. Person B can go to an agent and monetize that, so withdraw from the agent. And so that agent network, the spread, guarantees that a message on your phone translates to currency, hard currency, no matter where you are. Now, as it so happened, the telco that developed this outsourced the agent network. They were not employees of the companies, but they trained them and they held them to certain standards to be able to maintain their franchise, if you will. Now, it so happens that the majority of these agents happen to be women. It wasn't by design, but somehow they were better suited for the job. And they were better, and so if you look at it critically, you'd say M-Pesa has grown critically because of the agent network, which is largely comprised of women. So you quickly realize there's an opportunity there to leverage onto something that the market is telling you. Gender. Is there a role for gender in your uptake? So in this particular case, if we're talking about mobility, if you have motorcycles, you're going to need charging. Probably you're not going to be able to afford a big battery on the motorcycle because of cost, because of weight. So you might need to have a swap system. So you start thinking maybe we're going to need an agent network. Is that agent network better sort of run and managed if it leveraged something like the M-Pesa network, which is our question. So you need to look at these unique opportunities. Now, furthering this conversation about gender, there's a phenomena maybe all over the world, but speaking particularly here about East Africa, there's this women's and saving credit cooperative societies. This is informal saving societies that have really flourished. I'll give you two quick stories. We have the Kenya Women Finance Trust, which is a bank, which is the largest microfinance institution in Kenya. It is now accredited as a microfinance bank. It has almost 1 million clients around the country. It's employed about 3,000 people. And as you can see, it has a huge loan book. 2017 was just about $20 million, and this is dollars, with assets of about 300 million in 2017 and deposits of about 160 million. This is from small little deposits from women doing informal trade. Now on the right, you see a very informal one. This is a small county, rural county called Murang'a. This is in Kenya. The SACCO has 25,000 members. They were able to raise $1 million. They were pulling as little as 10 cents a day. And they were able, with that money, to build this complex that you see here. This is a complex that's going to be an apartment block for a neighboring university. So you start saying to yourself, when we're looking for financing, when we say we want to go to finance the transition to electric mobility, obviously we tend to just think outside. Oh, we need to get this huge grant. We need to be able to leverage, some foreign aid, but then you don't realize that there are huge amounts of resources sitting within existing financing mechanisms that just need to sort of be leveraged, either be by policy change or just by some sort of innovative mechanisms. And so this is trying to open up people and say, hey, it's very important to look at even innovative financing mechanisms. So adding those two, the conversation on M-Pesa and SACCOs together, we commissioned a study. UNEP commissioned a study with the Flown Initiative, which is an NGO in Kenya that works on, looks at women in transport. So they specialize on gender in transport, which is very niche and very brave of an NGO to really narrow their vision as they have. But because of that, they're able to really do in-depth work. Now, what we were doing is we call the study the Follow the Money study. We're looking at the border sector and understanding across the space, because whenever you look at trying to sort of leverage gender in something, people tend to have a bit of a narrow focus. They say, well, there's only like male riders. Why can't we get more women riding or more women customers? Well, if you look at the whole ecosystem, you start to see opportunities. So from looking at how the bikes are imported, because they're of course all largely imported and assembled here, how they're financed. So who are the clearing agents? How do they get registered? Where do they fuel? You ask yourself, so you try and actually go out there and you go to these local sheds here and you find out where people fuel. How do they get paid? Do they use mobile applications? Where do they buy phones? Where do they eat lunch? Where when they're sitting here because they don't go home for lunch, who feeds them? So then you look at their safety gear. Obviously, you need to look at maintenance. Where are these bikes being maintained? And how are those spares being brought into the country if they're not being locally manufactured? When you look at the whole ecosystem, you start to see a narrative and you start to realize where it is you can be able to leverage gender fully. You might realize there's a certain aspect, and actually we have started seeing conversations here where a lot of these borders don't own the motorcycles themselves. They actually are paid riders, sort of like as we've seen with Uber now. And so what happened, that Uber in now the developing world. And so what happens is we followed some of these and we found out that there were women SACCOs that were buying borders, and so were the owners and were the ones actually now sort of financing this growth. And so you realize if you were to put money, you now know, you have a better understanding of where you can be able to tweak. Another thing that we are also looking at is, like I mentioned, safety, talking to safety stakeholders, talking at the National Transportation Safety Authorities and people like those to say, hey, listen, if we're going to have a huge disruption, if we're going to bring in green financing to support a transition to green mobility, where people are we're going to have more money in the pockets of the riders, isn't this also an opportunity to sort of, you've captured their attention, because you're saying for you to be approved for this concessional loan, you need now to recertify your driving license. You need to have, proper safety gear. You need to be part of this, sort of safety network. And so it's an opportunity. It's almost like a gatekeeping opportunity to sort of bring some sense of order to what previously may have been a bit of a wildly growing system that you just wanted to bring a bit of order to. And also, of course, the taxman is interested now. He's like, well, largely this is out of our domain. And so maybe now we're able to bring these people into the fold, and then the countries will be able to raise more revenue. Something else is, I like to say, is expect the unexpected. There's always different things when you're trying to bring in these demonstration studies where they previously don't exist. There'll be changing import processes, difficulty registering electric vehicles, delays from both shipment, the manufacturing, wherever you're sourcing them, be it through COVID, things like that just came from nowhere. Procurement laws for different entities. So you have different procurement laws for the entities. So you have to think critically. Are you the best organization to be the one importing this for the demonstration studies? You might have prohibitive procurement laws. So you might want to partner with like an NGO or an entity that is a bit more fleet of foot to be able to navigate this ever-changing waters. Of course, we had elusive tax exemptions where you get the government involved and they say this is something they want to support, so write us a letter, we'll give you exemptions, but then it ends up being a bit more elusive because there's a bit more protocol and red tape. So these are things that you just need to expect. You cannot overlook the potential of disruption due to political events. Insurance is a big thing. Insurance companies, and apologies to anyone who may be from the industry on this webinar, tend to be an interesting industry. Getting insurance is usually easy. Going in and saying, I want to insure this, is usually an easy process. If something were to happen, getting the claim met, that's a different conversation. So knowing that, you need to have a conversation and say, hey, listen, previously there were no electric vehicles here. What is your definition of risk for electric vehicles? So you need to have these conversations, because you might end up spending a lot of money on insurance that might not be come out to serve you well in the case of a claim. So we've been engaging the insurance industry, trying to get their sense of what they think is going to happen to the to mobility when we transition to electric mobility, because of the differences in sort of risk. When an electric car or bike has an accident, it has a higher chance of always being written off or totaled. And so what does that mean for insurance? And so it's good to understand these things. It's very important to build strong networks. This is just an overview of entities. This is just this is just in Kenya. So within 3-4 years of starting to work on electric mobility, we quickly realized there's a lot of players. So one of the things we've done as a UN is convene these entities and make sure that everybody's pulling in the same direction. Let me not say the right direction, but in the same direction, because what happens is, if you create competition at the onset, you will stifle uptake. The story I like to tell anybody in the industry is that your competition is not the next guy trying to bring in 5 bikes or a car. Your competition is the whole internal combustion engine industry. So all of you together in one little corner, representing less than 1% of the industry, you're all on the same side of the scale. And I'm not trying to pit people against each other, but recognize that you need to pull together to be able to, for there to be traction, for there to be uptake. So network. So you don't have a pilot in isolation. You try and pull everyone in, because you want to try and get the most out of this demonstration study. We wouldn't be here if we were not trying to mitigate emissions. And so that, we've talked a lot about the sustainable development and the economics, but quite honestly, this is the entry point for the conversation, is trying to reduce air pollution and to reduce climate change through this climate emissions. This is a slide I had mentioned earlier, where we realized when we looked at certain parameters, looking at the annual kilometers traveled, we realized that we might actually be getting more CO2 for new imports. This is not for total fleet. So for every year, when you have 75,000 vehicles come in and you have 150 or 200,000 motorcycles coming in, and they are all largely taxis. So all the motorcycles coming in, I think 98% of the motorcycles coming into the Kenyan market and the Uganda market, they are all these borders. So they're doing at least 100 kilometers a day. And when you look at the kilometers they're traveling, the poor maintenance and what have you, you realize they actually, this is looking from a fuel balance and also from just some other modeling, that there might be more CO2 coming from the motorcycle. So when you have these conversations with people and they say, it's very easy to say, why are you trying to electrify motorcycles? They should be there. We should have buses, and we shouldn't even be thinking about motorcycles. That is very true. We should be more efficient with our shared modes of mobility. But when you step back and you look at the bigger picture, at how employment has changed because of motorcycles, when you look at how long it takes to put a bus rapid transit system into a city, I think the DART system in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, I think from planning to physically implementation, I think is anywhere on the order of 10 to 15 years, depending on who you talk to. So for those 10 to 15 years, if you don't do anything about the growth of motorcycles, you have a big problem. And this is just CO2 emissions. When you look at pollutant emissions, it's even worse. You have 12 times more hydrocarbons from motorcycles than light duty vehicles, 3 times more carbon monoxide, 4 times more nitrogen oxide emissions. And so you quickly realize it's almost like you need to fight a fire even as you're trying to implement more shared modes. Now, the other thing to think about is that the way sub-Saharan African cities are and the way we are set up, we're going to have this need for fast last mile connectivity for a while. We're not going to be able to have bus rapid transit going into the sort of semi-urban communities, all of them anyways. And so you're going to have major arteries have bus rapid transit systems, but then you're going to need to incentivize people to not get into their car, but to try and get into, hopefully, light electric vehicles to be able to access these. And so that's something that we need to think about. We talked about policy, the need for policy. So it's important to look at your institutions, how they're set up, who's responsible for what, to really accurately quantify the policy gaps as you're trying to demonstrate, because your demonstration studies will help shed light on the policies that you will need. Working in Southeast Asia with different stakeholders, were able to come up with policy guidelines for electric 23-wheelers for Southeast Asia, looking at how they can be integrated into existing urban transit modes. This is a very important slide. It's very important to look at innovative financing mechanisms. I talked about it when I talked about the women's SACCOs. So we were able to go in and look at how borders are being bought today, because you say we need financing for the shift, but the growth that you have now has been financed somehow. So how has that happened? Because you might have enough resources there if you were to shift it. So we looked at that and we quickly realized for want of a better word, it's very predatory. It's very high interest rate, very short payment terms, and these riders are paying it. They pay these aggressive loans in very short periods of time. When you talk to the banks, they say, well, it's a very high risk industry, so you need to get the money back in the shortest period of possible because of the accidents, because of the potential defaults if you have loans for longer. So we were able to talk to banks and look at ways to be able to come up with better models for electric mobility, looking at realistic risk, because that's actually one thing that we came up with. We actually asked banks, how did you define this risk? And after pushing enough questions, you quickly realize everybody references somebody else. And eventually you go to the end of that reference list, you realize there was somebody who just said, I just thought, I thought this percent or 5 to 6% default rate would be good, but not based on anything, or based on very, very rudimentary assessments. So it's good to push and go to the end of that line to ask why, and then build back up for electric mobility. Looking at, national programs such as the Green Bonds program in Kenya, where they have created a bonds program where you can be able to actually get the stock market to raise financing for green investment. So green investment in housing, in infrastructure, in mobility. And so it's important to look at any ways you can innovate to get resources. I think I'll stop there. I just want to say thanks to all our partners. This is not even enough of a list of all the partners that we work with. I'll stop there for now. Thank you very much for your attention. Thanks.
Thank you so much, David. It's really, really, really interesting. All that you said, it is really wide open vision on electrification. I'm really glad we invited you. I hope everyone gets as excited as I am. I think that all the lessons learned are just applicable to the projects in Latin America and the Caribbean. There are many ways, as you say, many things that are really true about the BRTs or of the DART in Dar es Salaam. This also happens in many of our cities. They have this planning process, but you have to be sure that this is massive transportation that is completely different of the borders or all the means of transportation that we have here. Every means of transportation must fit what it does and then electrify, right? There is a big idea on the heads of everyone is that electrification must go only through buses. And that may not be the case because then the buses will run empty and then you will have a financial big problem ahead, right? So thank you so much for all the information. I want just to point out some things that I think that are really easy to apply to our region is the terms of renewable energy, how the electrification links with the renewable energy and how can move forward both things. I know that in many Caribbean countries, for being a small island countries, the terms of imports of fuel and the energy, renewable energy is very much linked. So I think that this vision of how they link together and how they can provide benefits from one another is really good idea, is really good approach to electrification. The economic potential, the imports and the domestic manufacturing is something that we are really looking into that also in the region. I know that in the region we have countries that are actually big manufacturing cars and buses manufacturing, such as Brazil, such as Mexico, Argentina. We have something in Colombia, Ecuador, but then seeing how it can go a step further and how can we provide these manufacturing ecosystem all around all the countries and not only the big ones, and how can we promote the creation of these value chains in all the countries. I know that I saw some time ago that there was this electric taxis manufacturing or production in Togo, also supported by UNEP and the CTCN. And I was very much impressed on how such a small country could, start manufacturing those vehicles that then provide, manufacturing employment, service employment, maintenance employment, all this value chain that actually creates way more than just a transportation service to the country. So I think that's also a vision that we want to pursue in Latin America, not only in the big countries, but also in the smaller countries. And then the 9 main points that you say, I absolutely love them. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Because I think they're really focused on all the, not only on those type of vehicles, but in any type of vehicle. You have to collect the data and then fit for purpose. And what we say, if they are running in minivans, and this happens in many Latin American countries, then don't try to electrify with a massive bus. It's just, fit for the purpose. I think that's really good, kind of guide to every project. The unique opportunities and the gender role, I think is also that we have been only looking for mainly for the bus drivers, like promoting women for bus drivers. But then, as you say, if you look at everything, and I love the picture of having everything, whether they have lunch, whether they do the fueling process, and who is the one that owns the assets actually. That is a really comprehensive view or where the gender role comes in, right? Not only just to make gender drivers, women drivers, but more than that. I think that's also really, I really loved it, as you can see.
Thank you. No, thank you. I think for me, the follow the money thing is just it was mind blowing, because if you ask yourself, people have different wants out of life. And so not everyone wants to be one thing. And so you do want parity and you want equal opportunity and access. But if you don't follow the data, and I think it just goes back to the first principles of research, is just collect data. I think we skimp the collecting of data part in the rush to finalize projects and what have you. So I think for me, data is what's important. I think going back to your questions on renewable energy, what we've seen in Sub-Saharan Africa, at least for where we've touched on, is that it's a bigger conversation, the link, when you're talking about light electric vehicles. Obviously, when you're talking about buses, you start, it's a big power requirement. And so renewable energy starts becoming a bit less realistic, unless it's powering the national grid in a very big way. So here we've seen small swap systems. We've seen in Zimbabwe, there's an entity called Mobility for Africa that has a very interesting project that has light three-wheelers that are helping women get produce from their homes to the market. And they have these kiosks where they charge the batteries, the swappable batteries, using solar. And because it's a bit, you're talking about less energy density, it's more realistic, and they have a lot more time. So you're able to do more with solar in that capacity. And of course, people will start looking at wind and maybe even like micro hydro. So there's a lot more link, I like to say, with light electric vehicles, and you start seeing that with swap systems. So that's the linkage. And also we see it with a lot of mini grids, if you will, a lot of systems where they're putting in off-grid applications for power. And then now the batteries can act sort of as a power bank, but it's not yet fully. I've not seen somewhere where it's fully applied, but people are thinking about these things. In terms of the buses, and I want to be careful in not sounding like we're knocking buses. We work on UNEP does work on promoting buses too, and it as a more efficient mode. The point is what you've said well, which is look at the local context and understand why it's working the way it is, because ultimately we want to make the mobility more sustainable, be it on the energy side, but also on access and what have you. So I'm not trying to say that you should not look at buses, and you're not trying to say that, but you're absolutely right. We should look critically at why things are the way they are. Where we see a problem, we try and bring that kind of disruption. But then where we think the problem here is not so, there's no congestion, there's no all the other classic mobility problems, then let's try and solve the problems that exist. And so I think for me, again, it's data. It's stepping back and observing and getting the right data. The conversation on economic potential, I think for me, I like to say that's the conversation where you get the people's attention is economics. You unfortunately don't get people's attention when you talk about how much less CO2 they're going to emit. I mean, not many people. Let me not say you won't get people's attention, but you will grab people's attention when you say this is how much you will save on fuel every day as a rider. This is how much as a country you will save in foreign exchange by not importing fuels and using an energy source that you already create domestically. When you start and you grab people's attention with that, and I'm not saying that it's going to be effortless and problems don't exist, but when you grab people's attention with that, then you'll be able to get the benefits that the other benefits, in the straight environmental benefits you have. But it's now talking more towards this issue of circularity and having sustainable development pull many different things together. And that's what for me electric mobility did for me. It was able to connect the dots on many levels. So now you talked about manufacturing. We do try to make sure that we highlight the opportunities for countries to jump into the manufacturing or to what do you say, to leapfrog is a common word, or to make up time on more than 100 years of internal combustion engine manufacturing. And to be honest, I mean, being very honest, a lot of the big internal combustion engine manufacturers are already thinking about electric mobility, and so that we might still be seeing the same gap. But when you look at light electric vehicles, motorcycles, scooters, bikes, and you look at local use cases, you start seeing an opportunity, because you cannot design for that which you do not know. When you design a car, you're designing for roads that, this is how roads are built the world over, and this is what we need. But the minute you start looking at informal use, you start looking at rural use of two and three wheelers, you start quickly realizing there's an opportunity here for a local product that understands what needs to happen here, and can better respond to breakages, can better respond to all these other problems. So I think instantly it becomes more reality that it's not even that you need to convince people, that people will need to fill that void. And so it might not happen for buses for every country, but we still try to say, hey, try and insist on having a local assembly plant or something, text transfer and all that. But for sure, when you look at the light electric vehicles, there's a lot more opportunity for local solutions, for local sort of context.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. We do have some questions for the audience. It's Adam Boyson. He says, greetings from California. Given the importance of the electricity sector, are you working with utilities in those countries? He says, our e-mobility work is often driven by their interests.
Yes, actually, so I didn't mention, as we speak right now, we're about to launch the demonstration pilots. We've had delays. We've had lots of delays. So I'm speaking from pain when I say about the lessons I've learned. We've had years of delays, 2 years. We're launching a pilot in Kenya next month, I hope, with bikes that are now in place, with the national utility, the Kenya Power and Lighting Company. So we're working with them because they're very interested in piloting electric mobility, because obviously, one, it's a huge potential new customer for them, but they're also looking at it more in terms of transitioning from the new era of business where you're not just one thing. Amazon is no longer just supplying books. Now they trade on items and many other things, and they have content, media content and all that. So the power company now is thinking we could get into manufacturing of electric vehicles, not just looking at converting their own fleet. So we do work with power companies. In the data collection, we do go to the power companies and ask them, hey, we're working on this. We need data. We need to understand your future plans for expansion. How much of that is renewable? Have you thought about electric mobility? And so we are now seeing definitely in East Africa that the utilities being more keen on what's the future of electric consumption, and how can they play in that. And even for example, we talk about charging infrastructure. It's a big thing that I haven't touched on, but people talk about what about charging infrastructure for light duty vehicles. And one of the things we've had as feedback that that the utility here is looking at is saying they already have the infrastructure, that their network, and so can their network be used as the charging infrastructure, where you pull up to a pole and it has a charging station, a charging unit, and you plug it in your car and you charge, and you punch in your account and PIN and all these things, and then it's billed to your monthly bill. You don't even pay for it then. It's more convenient for you and all that. So they're thinking about, what linking it to IT. So yeah, so we definitely do work with IT, with power companies and their key stakeholders and the line ministries too, because we do want to attack policy at the national level.
Okay, thank you so much. We have another question that I think that they can go link is, it says, is there any regional association of electric mobility in Africa joined by governors or by governments to jointly advancing the technology? And in your opinion, which country would you say that goes the leading way of electrification?
In Africa. In Africa?
Yeah.
Okay. So there's a lot of direction or traction on sort of associations. We've worked together with the Smarter Mobility Africa. This is an event that's been held 2 years in a row now. Part of the Generation E team. They also are the people who sponsor the Global Electric Vehicle Road Trip, GVERT, and they've done these in Africa now. They've done in Middle East, in Europe, and so there is this growing consortium of entities, I should say, that are coming together. Now, there's no, I think there's a few. There's one for East Africa run by the Association of Electric Engineering Professionals, IEPA. There's a few. There's I think there's a North African one. There's the Uyilo Institute in South Africa that is pulled together a lot of entities in South Africa, and they've also been very engaging in other parts of Africa. So I think we're at a point where we do see a lot of these associations growing. It'll be interesting in the next couple of years how they end up. In the answer in terms of leading, in terms of the push, I'd say it's probably South Africa, and then I'd throw in East Africa as a close, maybe second, tied with Morocco. So East Africa being, Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda. I'd throw Eastern Africa, so that we have Ethiopia, and did I mention Rwanda in East Africa for sure? So the hotspots are South Africa, East Africa, and then now Morocco is really they've really got a lot of projects going on. Not to say that nobody else is working, but you're asking in terms of leading. So I'll end up mentioning everyone, but that's I think how it's probably stacked right now.
Okay, thank you so much. I think there's something also similar going on in Latin America, is that each country has at least one association of National Association of Electric Mobility or Sustainable Mobility, but then we still don't have regional governance on how to pursue, commonly on incorporation, some things that may be achieved better in cooperation. In our side, it will be, for instance, charging infrastructure development, and how can that be run, in coordination among every country, so you can, have standardization and all these kind of things together. So that's something that we still lack a bit on the region, and I think that probably happens there.
Yone, we push for that in all our projects. We talk about harmonization, and so in Southeast Asia, we've been able to have harmonized approach to policy setting. We're trying to push it more within the sub-regions, because there's a lot more commonality within the sub-regions. So we've been able to work successfully within the sub-regions in looking at fuels and vehicles policy. So having an East Africa, diesel standard, and an East Africa emission standards, East Africa import standards. Same thing for West Africa and SADC, which is Southern Africa. So previously to electromobility, in terms of mobility, we had a lot better sort of sub-regionalization, not regional, sub-regional. So the sub-regional approach has been very successful. So we think that even for electromobility, we'll still try and push it that way. But then there is a need for linking the sub-regions because of the common area goals for Africa, common trade area.
Yeah. Thank you. We have another question on conversion. So conversions from ICE to EV motorbikes. What potential is there for this, and which good examples are there for countries to learn from?
There've been a few people who have had conversions for motorbikes. There's definitely conversions for light duty vehicles. To my mind, I've seen conversions in Uganda. There's an entity called Bodawerk, which has got a good website, Bodawerk. We've seen conversions in Kenya with Opibus, and I know of I want to say Rev Electric. There's some entity called Rev Electric or Revolt. Now I'm confused, but there's a few in Western Africa. Now, my take on it is that the economics have not really incentivized the growth of conversions for electric motorcycles. The cost of conversion, the low cost of the internal combustion engine, the economics are not really good. But I'm a big fan of conversions because all the entities that have done conversions are fantastically aligned to design a product from the ground up. So if you actually invest the time to do a conversion, you're able to understand what not to do, why, how to design from the ground up. And so those entities I've mentioned tend to be really, really technically astute in designing a product now from the ground up. And so it wouldn't have happened if it wasn't from trying to convert. So it's just like, the kid in the village who takes apart a radio and puts it together, that he has a better understanding of how to put together a better radio. And so conversions, I think I'm not saying they cannot work, but the cost of the converted product ends up being cost prohibitive. And so you end up encouraging somebody to still buy an internal combustion engine, a new one at lesser cost, or now look at a lower quality electric motorcycle from another part of the world coming in. So the economics is what tends to be a bit limiting, and that's why you've not seen too much conversions.
So, no, that's really interesting. Do you have? This is my question of a convention.
Sure.
Do you have any legislation passed in any countries about conversion in terms of safety, in terms of minimum requirements, something like that?
No. This is all happening sort of the Wild West. In fact, we had we have a company where the conversions that they're doing for light duty vehicles are all being used in national parks. So there's no need to register the vehicles because the registration process has not taken. They're now alive to the fact that there's such a thing as converting, but they're struggling with this concept of if you take out an engine. And by the way, there's international. I came to find out sometimes you think it's bureaucratic, but you realize there's international conventions that are sort of have to be dealt with. If you take an engine out, that vehicle is associated with that engine number, that chassis number is associated with that engine number, and so there's a need, I think, even within Interpol to make sure that the database, because that's how they catch vehicles that are stolen, right? That this engine number doesn't go with this vehicle. So if you're taking that out and putting in an electric motor, how you're able to sort of put that back into the official system is something that people are grappling with. I'm not an expert, but I know, and I talked to the NTSA here, they were saying it's not a problem we have with that. It's fantastic, but we don't. What is the engine number for this engine you put together? It's not an engine; it's an electric motor. So are we supposed to use the electric motor serial number as the engine number? It doesn't have a block. You know what I mean? It's just an electric motor. The batteries are consumable, so it's like saying changing the fuel tank. So because the energy, so the battery, if you think about it, is more like just like the fuel tank. So there's all these questions like, what are you asking us to register? Because now you've chopped apart. You've chopped apart what we call a car, and so we don't know what you're telling us to register. So it's an interesting conversation, and I do have empathy for the people who are involved in trying to make that policy work.
Yes, because that's also a big I don't know if I would call it concern, but it is something that we are looking at in Latin America, how to provide enough what guarantees to those to convert vehicles, even from bicycles to buses, and the passengers within them and the other passengers on the road, how the government can provide enough guarantees to say that vehicle is safe, that vehicle won't explode on the next corner, something like that, right? That is really complicated, something really complicated going on, and we are actually actively looking for legislations or policies on that regard, and we are really struggling to find any.
Yeah, and so I think it needs to fall into demonstration. It needs to fall into, we're not trying to change how you register, but can you allow us to test this? Can we get permission from the relevant authorities to try this out? And then as you're trying it out, there'll be a few more steps that will help the policymakers see how they want to internalize that. But if you're trying to get policy change straight away before a demonstration, then it's a bit of a tricky situation. But what you want is exemptions. So a lot of people are just looking for exemptions and sort of within a demonstration scale.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you so much. I think we are almost on the end. We have another last question.
Okay.
It says, have you analyzed the current legislation, policy, and regulation to scale up mobility in Africa? It's a very, very wide question. Mm-hmm. I would say that your whole a comprehensive view on what is lacking, especially in Eastern African countries, to scale up the electric mobility.
So we've not done an Africa-wide assessment of policy gaps, if I understood correctly. But if you are asking, what do I think are the barriers for uptake? Honestly, I still think it still starts with awareness raising. A lot of people are still unaware that you have cars that can drive for 300 kilometers. They're unaware that an electric vehicle exists. I mean, a lot of important people, I'm not talking about people who have got no access to information, people who have access, everyday people. So awareness raising is one big part. So this is not longer text. This is not a test. This is product that exists in many countries. That's one. I think it's important to talk about financing, but I'm very cautious when I say financing. It's not saying that we need to always dump additional money into a situation, but it's how you're incentivizing money to flow. So is money still consistently flowing away from sustainable mobility modes? And that's still a financing problem. So how are people able to access the financing that exists in a realistic way? So I think awareness raising, financing, and then now talking to private sector players, there's still a lot. I mean, everybody who comes in to try and do business in Africa still talks about difficulty of doing business, difficulty registering companies, difficulty getting things imported. And so the red tape or the hurdles that they have to go through is still a bit of a barrier. But as with any revolution, so we always like to quote the mobile revolution, even the border, the motorcycle revolution. I personally believe that the fire is just waiting to catch, and when the fire catches, the market will flip and completely, run full steam ahead. So, and I think we are literally within a year, or I don't want to be quoted now a year from now, but we're within a year or two of that fire. I don't want somebody to look back at this and say, you said within a year, but no, I think we're really close to that fire catching. But I'd say that I'd start with awareness raising, finance, and then the prohibitive nature, and that's policy, if you will. So I tend to say that we do need the right policy frameworks, but right now, when you don't even have awareness raising and you're still trying to develop the right products, I think it's hard to say that's the first problem. I think we need to have a lot of work done to come up with the right policies.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so thank you so much for the presentation, for your answers to the question, David. Thank you so much. It was really, really interesting, really wide opening to what is going on in other regions, from all the lessons learned that you taught us today. So thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you so much for everyone that is watching this session. Next Tuesday, we will have with us Maria Fernanda Ortiz, that is Deputy Manager of Transport in Bogota, that she will be talking about all these electrification goals that they have and how they've achieved all these more than 1,000 buses to be implemented in the BRT systems, in the whole transportation system in Bogota. So stay tuned. We will post this session. We will post David's presentation on the website, mobilatam.org. So stay tuned. Thank you again so much, David, for the conversation.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And Happy New Year. We are still on January.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.